Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, educators, administrators, officials, students. Welcome to Day 2 evening session of Global Education Conference 2019. We have a panel discussion coming up on the topic of building a sustainable value-based global education model. While we had a wonderful session in this Premamrutham auditorium today afternoon, there was a roundtable discussion going on as well, where various academicians deliberated on how the system of value education needs to be built. Here is a quick summary on that before we start the panel discussion. During the roundtable session, the first speaker was Dr. Kalpana Sampath, Director of Arpita Associates, who talked about their program, Education for Integrating Life, which is an initiative to impart life education to students that will enable evolutionary excellence. The second speaker was Ms. Jayashree Ashok, who spoke about the framework for building value-based education called Sacred Classroom, inspired by teachings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. Dr. Gagandeep Sharma talked about the strategic aspect for humane education. There is value education and technical education, he said, and the purpose must be clear. Guidelines for value education should be universal, rational, natural, and all-encompassing. Then Madam Kunvatyamal from Singapore talked about character and citizenship education in Singapore schools. Mr. Jose Pacheco spoke about the Ancora project, which began in 1969 in Brazil, where the community is the school. There are no desks and no classrooms. Child is asked what he wants to do, how to help in community, and find the answer themselves. Thereafter, Ms. Suvarna Chivapruk from Roong Arun School, Thailand, which started in 1997, she spoke about the holistic education provided at the school. She spoke about the physical environment that is so important for students to learn. Dr. Ram Bush from UNESCO talked about projects on sustainable development, on the cultural and biological diversity that is necessary. And Mr. Sushant Kumar Pandey from Praxis Vidyapeeth talked about value in children that should start early. Thereafter, he also spoke about Shantil Mutta Foundation, which started in 2015 for values-based school improvement. And Professor Pranab Chattopadhyay spoke about the ancient Indian education system where there was no structure and it was flexible, and the purpose was to create self-awareness for transformation. That was the roundtable discussion that happened this afternoon. And now we have a panel discussion, like I said, on towards building a sustainable value-based global education model that is so necessary in today's times. I will now call upon the panelists and I request them to please come onto the stage as I call out their names. First, Sadhi Bhagavati Saraswati from Paramarth Niketan, Rishikesh, India. Ms. Jayashree Ashok, co-founder and director, Creative School and Pragna Living Wisdom Center, India. Mr. Jose Pacheco, founder, Escola de Ponte, Bridge School in Portugal. Madam Kunvatyamal, Senior Teaching Fellow, National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. His Excellency Mr. Lee Tu Buapau, former Director, Minister of Education and Sports, Laos. Dr. Ram Buj, National Program Officer, Natural Sciences, UNESCO Cluster Office for South Asia. Ms. Suvarna Chivapruk, Academic Director, Roong Arun School, Thailand. Dr. Nimrod Scheinman, Founder and Director, Israel Center for Mindfulness and Education. Mr. Sushant Pandey, Director, Praxis Vidyapeeth Educational Trust, India. And Mr. B.N. Narasimhamurthy, Chancellor, Sri Sathya Sai University for Human Excellence, Karnataka, India. And now I would like to introduce the moderator who will be moderating the panel discussion, Professor A. Rahman. Professor Rahman teaches at Harvard Business School, INSEAD, and several other international business schools. He has worked as CEO of leading multinational corporations in all the 4 continents. He is in several committees of the Government of India. He has been associated with the educational activities of the Sri Sathya Sai educational institutions for over 20 years and has presented Baba's social initiatives at several forums of the United Nations. Professor A. Rahman.
Sairam to all of you. With surrender at the feet of Bhagavan Sathya Sai Baba. Let me at the outset welcome the distinguished visitors seated on the dais here. Even rainbows have only 7 colors, but we have 12 here, 12 of the brightest and the best. They are here to share their wisdom and ideate on an issue which is important for the very survival of the human race. I think it was Bertrand Russell who once said that we are in the midst of a race between human skills as to the means and human folly as to the ends. Men have probed the atom and pushed the frontiers of outer space. But they have spanned the ocean and discovered the secrets of the universe. But the same men have allowed narrow causes to gnaw at their ideals. Histories of leadership of most of the societies today appear to be a very pathetic amalgam of a lack of intellect with lack of character and lack of knowledge. And it is because humanity has not effectively used one of their principal weapons of education, which, according to Swami Vivekananda, as we learned yesterday, is the manifestation of the divine perfection already in man. And such education we need must be imparted to the child, to the lad, and to the young man. Because as a twig is bent, so a tree will grow. In fact, we want an educational model which is not only about intellectual knowledge, not only about measurement, not only about academic achievement, but it's also about heart, feelings, emotions, love, compassion, generosity, and above all, beauty. Bhagavan Sathya Sai Baba has explained this beautifully when he said that the purpose of education is not for living, but for life. And he used 5 umbrella terms to cover all these: love, truth, peace, right conduct, and nonviolence. Therefore, the true aim of education is to give this inner discipline. Aristotle called such education an ornament in prosperity and a refuge in adversity. Education, we are told, as we learned in the last 2 days of discussion, must turn mirrors into windows. It must unsettle the mind of the learners, widen their horizon, inflame their intellects, and above all, teach them to be human. As each said, education is not the filling of the pail, but the lighting of the fire. And the purpose of education is not knowledge of facts, but practice of values. The story is told of Maxim Gorky, who visited a school once with one of his inspectors. There, the children tried to demonstrate to the inspector their ability to jump like a frog, swim like a fish, and sing like a bird. When Maxim Gorky asked them whether they know how to act like a man, none of the children had the right answer. And today, the warning bells are ringing to create a system of value education that will teach the students just this: to behave and act as a man should. Therefore, these 10 experts today will dwell upon different facets of such a value education. They will talk about how to impart such an education, particularly to the Gen Z, who are a bunch of youngsters today who have learned to swipe before they learn to speak. They will explore how these teachers will take these youngsters through the value pyramid, from knowledge to appreciation, from appreciation to discrimination, and from discrimination to action. And how they will develop the student's personality that must have the constructs of intellect, which is truth, emotion, which is peace, psychic, which is love, spiritual, which is non-violence, and physical, which is right conduct. Again, values are nothing but normative standards of concept and behavior that a society creates, absorbs, evolves, and accepts. One of the most powerful forces that go to create this is the religious thought that is expounded out in the different faiths. How can a teacher use this truth without being accused of proselytization? How can the teacher reassure them that the world's greatest spiritual traditions are like different puzzles of a giant jigsaw puzzle? Each piece is different, but each piece is essential to complete this picture. And they will also discuss what is the best way to convey to the students the concepts of value as embodied in different faiths, and how can they help them to understand and distinguish between religion, spirituality, morality, and ethics. The mediocre teacher teaches, the good teacher explains, the superior teacher demonstrates, and a great teacher inspires. Such a teacher does not bid you to enter the house of his wisdom, but rather leads you to the threshold of his mind. He will tell you where to look, but not what to see. Where do we find such teachers? And how do we train them? It is said that Socrates used to compare himself to a horsefly flying around the ancient agora, stinging his fellow citizens, asking 3 basic questions. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it useful? And like Socrates did, how can we make our students learn silence from the talkative, toleration from the intolerant, and kindness from the unkind? I think it was Jalaluddin Rumi who once said, "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself." How can the teachers motivate this process of transformation? And structurally, how can we create schools today which will become spiritual incubators like the Gurukula of yesterday? And again, education today must be universal and available to all. And how can we replicate such a model? And how can we scale it up? Because it's all about magnitude and size today. Is it possible to have a global model which can be tuned to different cultures, yet have the same core? And because it affects the children of the world who share a common destiny, how do we make the governments of different countries with different political hues agree to a unified public policy and value education? How do we do this? And these learned men and women today will elaborate the whole way. From the why of value education, they will gravitate to what and how. You will hear from 10 of the best. Keep all the doors and windows of your mind open so that these ideas can waft inside you. We will start with the first speaker. She has traveled from Stanford to Rishikesh, which is a long hop, but that enabled her to blend the logic of the West with the spirituality of the East, thereby building an exciting bridge. From Padmarth Niketan Ashram in Rishikesh, she travels extensively to United Nations, Parliament of the World Religions, and several other international conferences and summits, lecturing on subjects as varied as Consciousness and Sustainability, Sadhvi Bhagavati Saraswati ji.
Where do you want me to speak?
You can speak from here, sit, whatever.
What do you want?
Yeah, you can go there. Whatever way you can. Yeah, whatever you choose. You can go there also. Yeah.
Then I can see everybody together. Wonderful. All of the distinguished panelists, sisters and brothers, it's such a wonderful honor and joy and blessing to be here at this wonderful conference on what really is needed in our world today. Because all of that we're facing, well, in not too many years, the present will be created by those who are the children today. And so our system of education is literally the seeds of the garden that we, our children, our grandchildren, are going to live in. Now, the question becomes, as has been put so beautifully to us, what are those seeds? And I think it's so important to begin by asking ourselves, are we giving our children, are we giving our students in their education the tools they need to create the world they want to live in? That's what education is. We don't go to school to memorize things just for the sake of memorization. We don't go to learn things simply for the sake of repeating them on an exam. The point of education is it gives us the tools to create the world that we want to live in. We learn history so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. We learn science and math so we can create and invent, progress in our societies and in our worlds. We learn languages so we can communicate. But as we all know, this isn't enough. My favorite story on this is a story of 3 men who are stranded on a boat in the middle of the ocean. And on the boat, there's a mathematician, a scientist, and a philosopher. And the boatman is the one guiding the boat, driving the boat. And as they're there on the boat, the mathematician says to the boatman, "So tell me, Mr. Boatman, do you know how to do geometry? Do you know how to do trigonometry? Can you at least do long division?" And the boatman says, "I'm not educated in that way." He says, "I only know how to take God's name in the morning when I wake up, at night before I sleep, before each time I take food or drink." And the mathematician says, "Well, then at least 30% of your life has gone in vain." Next, the scientist says to him, "Well, all right, so you're not a math guy, but you must know science. You must at least know Newton's laws of physics." The boatman says, "I'm not educated in that way. I only know how to try to see the divine in all, wherever I look, and to worship that divine equally in all." The scientist says, "Well, then at least 40% of your life has gone in vain. And lastly, the philosopher says, well, all right, maybe not math, maybe not science, but you must know philosophy. If not Socrates, if not Plato, then Vedanta. Something you must know about philosophy. So the boatman closes his eyes and he enters this meditative trance. And when he opens them, he says, I'm not educated in that way. And the philosopher says, well, then at least 50% of your life has gone in vain. And at that moment, the storm picks up, and the boatman knows this boat is going to capsize. And as the wave carries the boat high into the sky before dropping it down in the ocean, the boatman says to his passengers, do you know how to swim? No, they cry. And as the boatman watches, the mathematician, the scientist, and the philosopher drown, he says sadly, I think 100% of your lives have gone in vain. And I love that story because I come from an academic background. I come from Stanford. I had really the best that aspect of education has to offer. And it's wonderful. The story doesn't mean there's anything wrong with math, science, philosophy. We need it. But in the ocean of life, it doesn't teach us how to swim. And what we need today is that which teaches us how to swim in the ocean of life. Time is very short. We have a lot of speakers. I want to just very quickly give a couple of just quick things that we need to plant those seeds in the system of education such that our children have the tools they need. Whether we metaphorically talk about swimming in an ocean, whether metaphorically we talk about growing the plants and the trees, or whether without any metaphors, we simply speak of co-creating the world that we know we are all supposed to live in. And the first thing they need is an education that is rooted in oneness instead of separation. Currently, the way we are taught in school is all about differences, whether it's differences on the base of color, religion, culture, lineage, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, whatever way we are taught to discriminate. Our education system puts us an arm's length away from really the truth of the oneness that we are. The emphasis on using only the intellectual mind and sacrificing the intuitive, feeling, spiritual heart is a system that literally creates people who live an arm's length away from the world we are connected to. And it's that illness that leads to judgment, that leads to depression, that leads to violence, that leads to war, that leads to environmental destruction. If you take anything that ails our world today, from individual depression and addiction, up to war, to terrorism, to violence, to climate change, all of them can be boiled down to one root cause, which is the illusion of separation. I'm separate from myself. I'm separate from God. I'm separate from my family, from my community, from people of different colors, different races, different religions. I'm separate from Mother Earth. I'm separate from those who live in another country, who are starving and suffering. I'm separate from future generations. So we need an education system that brings us back to the truth of our oneness. An education system that is rooted, as you began so beautifully with, in love. Love connects us. And that brings us to my second point. There's a lot more I could speak about on oneness, but I want to move through as quickly as I can. Second point is our identity. Currently, our education systems teach us who you are is how you perform. You are stupid, you are smart. You are good, you are bad. You are an A student, you are an F student. You're a success, you're a failure. Every child who's walked home with a not very good report card or an exam that they failed knows that when they go home and in school, the message is not just you failed the exam. The message is you are a failure. The sum total of who you are is wrapped up in the number on this piece of paper. Your parents' happiness, your parents' peace, your worthiness of love from them, your worthiness of occupying your place on planet Earth is wrapped up in the number on your exam or on your report card. And so we need an education system that, while insists upon, of course, right answers on math exams, simultaneously helps children understand you are not your score on the math exam. So that we don't end up with children, divine children, suffering such stress that they're throwing themselves off of roofs because they failed an exam, because they no longer feel worthy of their space on planet Earth. And lastly, we need a system in which science is humble. Science is wonderful. I'm a science student. I love science. The dilemma with science today and how it's taught is that it is taught as the way of knowing everything. That the tools of science, the scale, the beaker, the telescope, the microscope, the tape measure, whatever it may be, are actually the only tools that we have of validity. And this is the dilemma. Because we have gotten ourselves into a situation where I cannot tell you how many young people come up to me and say, well, I don't believe in spirituality because I believe in science. As though somehow science and spirituality were mutually exclusive. As though somehow they were claiming two different explanations for the same truth. Of course not. Of course not. The dilemma is that our current model of science denies the significance of anything that the current tools of science cannot measure. And that is foolishness, that is actually depriving us of the tools that we need to co-create the world we want to live in. And so we need a science that is able to say, here is that over which we have jurisdiction. That which fits in a beaker, that which can be measured on a scale, seen with a telescope, seen with a microscope, that with a weight, an area, a volume, that which our five senses can understand. And here's all the rest for which we don't yet have the tools, such that we don't end up with youth thinking that in order to be spiritual, they have to no longer believe in science. There is a beautiful overlap between them when we come into modern science rather than obsolete science. In conclusion, lastly, we need to not be ashamed. We were speaking earlier today about spirituality as that which is needed in our education system. And yet, that almost shame that as academicians, as scholars, as scientists, that we even have to mention the word. Well, we better come up with some other word, something that sounds more scientific. And this is a tragedy. We need to not be ashamed of using the word spirituality and of advocating for spirituality. Spirituality is not a dogma. Spirituality doesn't say you have to pray like this or worship like that or bow over here. Spirituality simply says who you are is more than the tools of science can measure. Who you are is more than your five senses can interact with. Who you are is more than your body. And so is the world. And when we take back spirituality, what we do is we give ourselves access to the tool that is actually the answer to all of that which is ailing our world. And so when we can bring back that spirituality, with it comes oneness, with it comes love, with it comes a deeper identity, and with it comes a humility in science. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sathya, for setting up the right tone to begin to create this connecting bridge to swim between the intellectual to the instinctive. Our next speaker translated Sri Aurobindo's teachings to action by creating a holistic education system and creative school, joyful teaching, responsible behavior, and the sacred atmosphere are hallmarks of our school. Mrs. Jayashree Ashok. May I request all the speakers to keep to your time limit of about 6 to 7 minutes so that we can get some questions also done in the end.
Jai Sai Ram. Is this on? Okay. Thank you for this opportunity to share, and not just share what we are experimenting with in our school, but also share being with all of you and learning with humility the amount of work going on. It's very inspiring to be in this conference because of the sheer goodness shared by so many people. So thank you for this opportunity. Our school, Creative School, is in North Bangalore. It's a small Gurukul-like school, inspired by the teachings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. About a decade old now. This was created after a spiritual journey and guidance that I received from my gurus. And it's been an amazing experience of watching children blossom when we provide the right foundation. The topic today was the most sustainable ways in which we can take value education forward. And the Mother's teachings have really guided us at Creative School. And if there's one thing that I must say, for value education to be sustainable, dignity needs to be restored to the art and science of teaching. Teaching in itself, a teacher is a sadhak. Teaching is a sadhana. It's a journey, a karma yoga of working with life's most precious gifts, children. Teaching in itself is a path of self-refinement, of overcoming obstacles inside, and functioning from pure love and expansiveness. A teacher is a role model. This is the mother's teachings. In our school, we begin with laying it out for the teachers, saying, are you interested in exploring your own spiritual journey through this divine profession of teaching? Are we interested in teaching, becoming an instrument and offering to the divine? Today, most teachers are dropouts from other professions, at least in mainstream schools. What a dishonor. It's time to come back. I quit my job at Microsoft, and I am so happy today because I'm a teacher, and I have an opportunity to serve children. Thank you. The second aspect I'd like to bring up, no matter what, one of the goals of education should be to keep the spirit of the child alive. Children must be loved for who they are. They are children of God, not for what they do. Whether they do or don't do, they deserve unconditional love. As teachers, as educationists, we must learn to be facilitators who help children, who stand by their side no matter what, never giving up on any child, bright or not so bright. Every child is beautiful, every child is perfect, every child has a spark inside them, every child has a unique potential. Our job as educationists is to discover that potential. And when we spark that potential in a child, everything else falls into place. Values just come because the child is honored for who they are. The foundation of education is unconditional love and awareness. Without unconditional love, there is no teaching and learning. Love and compassion seem very strange in this world of exams. And yet, they're very central to development of children and to our own development. The next aspect of education that we find is expansiveness. Today in society, education is devoid of expansiveness. We've lost hope. We've lost inspiration in some ways. To bring back through meditation, through connecting and realizing the divine through the art of teaching, we can bring back a teacher, an inspired teacher, teaches just by their presence, their role models, to be able to listen to children, their different solutions, their different points of view. This is a very important aspect of school. At Creative School, we give a lot of room for reflection. It's not just the joy of teaching, but also reflection time for children, so they can learn that they can also become conscious creators of their own lives. The next aspect that I would really like to touch on, which is very important again, is the spirit of service. Education has become a business today. It's affordable to some, and the type of education that is there in the most elite schools is based on the number of offerings they give. I have horse riding, I have swimming, I have polo, golf, whatever. Is that really what education is about? We really need to question the way in which education is happening in society today. And my humble pranams to Baba and all of you schools for really emphasizing the spirit of service. We try to do the same in Creative School. Thank you. Another aspect I'd like to bring, which is very critical in today's society, is that of increasing self-awareness. Self-awareness in adults and in children. There are many different ways in which one increases self-awareness, but in today's extremely fast-paced, swipe-oriented, as you put it, material world, if we are not aware of the impact of the surroundings on us, we will not be able to master ourselves. So right from a young age, children must be given the opportunity to pause amidst their curriculum and pay attention to their inner being, pay attention to their inner world. This is an activity we have in school all the way from 3 years old through 12th grade. Self-awareness takes different forms, becoming aware of the body, the breath, what is happening inside me, emotional intelligence, being aware of my thoughts, being aware of both the positive and negative aspects of myself. Self-awareness is very, very important because when we talk of values, we must realize in today's society, we always can choose. We can choose to live from higher and more inspired values. But if we are not aware and we are just imitating everyone else, sometimes we don't pay attention. The last point I want to make is value education is not a choice. It is the foundation of education. And education without the spirit or spirituality as the foundation is not education. Spirituality is education, values are education, and they are the right foundation for education. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jayasri Ashok, for all the practical examples that you gave from your thing. More than anything else, in spite of all the obvious passion you exhibit, you did manage to keep to the time of 6 minutes. Thank you very much. The next speaker is a revolutionary strategist in education from Portugal. His school bridges the gap between subjective curriculum and objective curriculum and validates it through a pedagogy that makes the bridge. Another eminent educationalist and philosopher describes this bridge school as the school I always dreamed about, imagining it could exist. Mr. Jose Pacheco.
Sairam. At the last years, I have made about 300 conferences in each year. And I never read a paper. But now, because my bad English, I need to read. And I apologize. 5 minutes where I try to share with you something that I do with other teachers. I hope you understand what I go to do. At the Bridget School in Portugal in 1970, we built an open school area and implemented the transition of the instruction paradigm at the learning paradigm. In autonomy, each student decided what to do and what to learn. In the years 90, with the arrival of the internet, easy access to information brought new challenges. In Bridge School, over an half a century, we have learned that schools are not buildings. Schools are people. And people are their values. 50 years ago, we learned that there are no special education. There are no environment education, no primary education, lifelong education. Only exists values-based education. People express themselves through individual and collective values, and when these values are transformed in principles of action, or in action principles, they give rise to projects that produce knowledge and cultural remaking. Bridge School became a reference, inspired and still inspires many educators. I've met hundreds of projects and visit thousands of schools in many countries. I was proud, vain. Until in 2001, I visited Brazil, in regions of extreme poverty and great violence. In Escola Âncora, I found ways to transition to the communication paradigm. the beginning of a new educational concept and new practices. And what I discovered in Brazil? First, the school does not change the society, but a different school can change people, and people can change society. A teacher does not teach what he says. Teacher transmits what it is. We learn by example, by imitation. And what we are the first industrial revolution school values: individualism, competition, and so on. That's why we must conceive a new social construction of learning that promotes humanized education. In community learning, we learn since prenatal, just the dead moment, 24 hours a day, 365 days of each year. We learn from each other, mediatized by the world for all humankind. Learning, it's not centered on the teacher or on student, because no one learns alone. Learning is centered on relationship. We learn at the public library, at the church, streets, internet, in the nature, in our homes. All community learns through a triple curricular dimension. First, the subjective curriculum. Each one of us has his own rhythm, intelligence, style, culture. Teacher is the human being who helps another human being to educate himself. Educare, from the Latin. To reveal the inner, unique, and divine being. Second curriculum, the community curriculum. I have no time to speak about this. And the third curriculum is the planetary conscientiousness curriculum. Me and Claudia, my wife, continue to learn with the people of Brazil and learning with you like yesterday and today, and I thank you very much. I'm grateful. We bring you an invitation to continue the dialogue, and we invite you to visit Brazil. I have published many books of theoretical approach about this. I only speak about facts, but if you can, if you desire, I can send to you all these books by email. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pacheco. You need not have apologized about the so-called lack of proficiency in English language. Because of the alleged proficiency, every word of what you said made a lot of sense. Every word was important. The next speaker is identified as one of the most inspiring women of Singapore. This teacher from the National University of Singapore is an expert in effective education, which focuses on students' belief systems, emotions, and attitudes. She has received national awards for 3 consecutive years for contribution to the education fraternity. Madam Kunavettammal.
Thank you for the kind words. Good evening. I'm Madam Kuna from Singapore. I just want to start with a personal anecdote. I started off as a teacher, a history teacher. I taught English, I taught philosophy for education. There was once upon a time I was even doing religious knowledge in English, and I taught Hinduism in English. That being the teacher, I moved on to become head of department for effective education in the same school. And moving on, progressing as a vice principal. The school that I was a teacher and head of department It's an elite school, one of the top girls' school in Singapore. And I was posted as a vice principal to a school in the neighborhood. And it was such a culture shock for me to enter that school. The principal of that school told me, Kuna, please check your car before you leave the school, in case the students puncture your tires, your car tires. So that was the state. And there was a gang incident, a parang incident. Parang is a big knife, where students were using that to threaten students from another group, another school. So there was a clash between two schools. And things like that were happening. And I was saying, what am I into? And I've got National Day Award for being an inspiring educator. And here I am in a school which is really very challenging. And the first week, what happened was the first week I had to confront a student. He wasn't properly attired. His first button was out. And I wanted to go near him and tell him, boy, you have not buttoned up. Can you make sure that you're properly attired? The head of department for discipline came running, Mrs. Nala, please, please do not interact with this child. He may even slap you. So it was a real shock to me. And it went on. 2 years I survived in that school as vice principal. I resigned after that 2 years. And in the course of the 2 years, I had a lot of time, a lot of interaction time with this boy. So when he was in secondary 1, I went in as a vice principal. When he was in secondary 3, I resigned. So I had announced to the whole school that I've resigned as a vice principal. I'm going on to do something else. And there was a reading program. All the children were seated at the parade square doing their reading. And I was like walking down the aisle. And this boy was seated doing his reading. And he looked up and asked, Mrs. Nala, are you resigning because of me? Oh my God. I almost teared. I had to control my tears. I had to go into my room to actually shed some tears. And I came back and spoke to the boy. No, you've got nothing to do with it. But this was a touch point. A touch point I've made with this boy, interacting over a period of 2 years. Series of interactions. And that resonates with me when we talk about character development in children, the state of being and the state of becoming, being and becoming. I love this phrase because it actually, we use this title for a series of civics and moral education textbooks in Singapore. And I'm asking myself, what is this state of being? This living in the moment. And what do we portray? What do we manifest? The qualities of that educator, the touch points we can make with our students, the impact that you can create or make on this child. And what do you see as becoming the child turning out to be? Or the educator turning out to be, what do I want to be as in my aspiration in teaching? So as now I've progressed on to become teacher educator at NIE, I'm telling my trainee teachers, I'm telling the heads of department who come on milestone leadership development program, telling them, what are you? What is the heartbeat? Do you have that heartbeat for teaching? What do you stand for as a teacher? What do you stand for as a middle manager? And have you shared that with people whom you interact? Do they know what you stand for? Do they know what you believe in? A lot of times we are caught up with the subjects, the content that we want to teach. We fail to communicate certain things about ourselves to these children. And there are many, many personal anecdotes you can bring into the classroom. So this state of being and state of becoming and the notion of touch point. In fact, this notion of touch point came in a few years later when I was posted to take on this secondment as a senior teaching fellow. My principal from the previous school, she gave me this book called Touch Point. And this book is actually written by Douglas Connon and Matty Nogat. I really would like to recommend all of you if you can get hold of this book. It is titled Creating Powerful Leadership Connections in the Smallest Moments. And he's talking about, these writers are talking about the touch points being magical. They are disruptions. You meet them along the corridor, you meet the students along at the school canteen, any part of the school, at the field, when you're conducting co-curricular activities. You can make use of that as a teachable moment. How do you transform that into something positive? That moment, living in that moment and getting the students to think about the state of becoming and that interaction playing an important role in making that transformation. I'm not going to go into details of the nuances of how we make this touch point. I do recommend you buy the book, you read the book, and you will be able to gather a lot more information. And this thing about seeing ourselves as a better version. Seeing our students as better versions, that's what we want at the end of the day. Improvement, either in behavior, attitudinal, engagement in learning. So that's what we want to see. The positive streak in me is asking me, what if? What is? What will be? What more? From the state of being to the state of becoming. There can be negative streaks as well, negative squeak, as I call it. Why if not? What is not? What will be not? What more not? But my appreciative inquiry constructs, because I'm an advocate of appreciative inquiry, and I'm very much into positive education. Telling me, define. Telling me, discover. Discover about yourself, discover about the teachers and the MMs, the middle managers that you're interacting with, discover about the students. Dream. What do you dream for? For yourself and for the teachers, the trainee teachers, before they get posted as beginning teachers in the school, and the middle managers. The next stage is like, yes, I don't stop at dreaming. The possibilities are there. But how do I realize that? How do I achieve, fulfill the dreams? So that's the design stage, sitting down to think of steps and the destiny that you want at the end of the day. So it's a 5D cycle in appreciative inquiry that I'm very much into, and I've introduced that. And I'm talking a lot about touch points with my students at NIE, and they are my kids. They are adult learners, but I call them kids, my NIE kids. Even the middle managers, I tell my friends, they are my kids. So that sense of, bonding with these students, it gives me a lot of pleasure working with them, because it will be a rippling effect. When they get back to the school, they are going to do wonders with the kids, if they can put that interaction to positive streak.
Well, your story reminds us of the Mrs. Thompson's play that we saw yesterday. Are all teachers in Singapore like this, outstanding at touch points?
We are encouraging every one of them to be. In fact, we have this phrase, every teacher a CCE teacher, which means every teacher is involved in character and citizenship education. You may be a teacher of mathematics, biology, whatever it is, the moment you interact with the kid, that touch point that comes in, values come in. All right?
Yeah. The next speaker comes from Laos, comes a former vice minister who has held several illustrious portfolios in UNESCO, CIMIO, and several preeminent international organizations and establishments. The World Education Congress gave him an award recognizing his outstanding contribution to education. His Excellency Lito Bopak.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to our Chancellor for inviting me to participate participate in this very, very important conference for me. Due to value education is a new concept for Lao PDR as well for the Ministry of Education. And I would like to thank all presenters for your excellent presentation. I have learned a lot of experience, your best practice, how you implement value education. Now I understand that in the past, we talked a lot about how to improve the quality of education. Very easy to say quality education, but how to improve the quality of education if we do not think about how we train our teacher, how our teacher teach our student. That's a big challenge. But before talking about the value education, allow me to brief you Lao context. In 1975, the year Lao People's Democratic Republic was established, education statistic was extremely dismal. Literacy rate only 10%. 10% only. That's a big challenge for the new country. How we can develop our country. How we can live the status of poorest country in the world. The least country in the world. That is a big challenge for the new government. So, based on this continuous situation, the Lao government decided to prioritize education as the key to reduce poverty. To make it happen, how to ensure that all Lao citizens have access to quality education. Lao people is composed of 50 ethnic groups. Most of them not speak Lao. And before 1975, the official language not Lao. Official language were French, not Lao. But since 1976, all our citizens should study in Lao, starting in kindergarten, primary education, lower secondary, upper, and sixth, etc., in Lao language. But how to make it happen? In rural area, no good teacher. We have many ethnic groups. We have to train teachers from different ethnic, because if they do not speak ethnic language, how they contact, they sensitize, they mobilize ethnic people, parents to send their children to go to school. Not easy, huh? Not easy. We have to do our best to make sure that everywhere we have teacher, the teacher should at least speak minimum the ethnic group languages. We have tried to our best. Based on the UNESCO goal target of EFA goal, that's very important. We have support from UNESCO and their partner. We have tried to our best to provide education for all, no discrimination. And gender equality is also challenges and very important. How to ensure that all girls and boys at different age come to school? Not easy. They are very poor. We are a poor country. They want to go to school, but nothing to eat. How they can go to school? We have to do our best to provide one school feeding program. Make sure that in the school, our students have to eat. We have a boarding school, ethnic boarding school also, to ensure that for the poor students, they have to stay in the boarding and go to school, have what to eat. Oh la la, they're very difficult, very difficult. But the government, with the support of our partner, we do our best. And from 1975 to now, after 44 years, we complete adult literacy. Primary education, primary rate, we reach 98.8%. Lower secondary, 75%. We have a technical vocational level, we have a university, 5 university. And the best student, talented student, can continue their study in higher education. That is our concern. But the problem is the quality. The government say we should do education strategy reform to reform how teacher can teach students effectively, efficiently. How students can learn efficiently, not easy. And now here, I learn about value-based education. And I see that based on this value education, many speakers show us on that can improve the quality of education. So for me, I think value education is the key to improve the quality of education. And I think it is important to ensure that education is not channelling of information, but it's transformative in nature. So transformative education is not nothing but educating the heart, along with educating the mind. Educating the heart is throwing out the inherent and talent value from within. Every child is pure and has all the right value. So letting them bloom is the key task at hand. To meet this goal, I will report my lesson learned from here to my minister. And we will try to do our best to have a clear policy. First, we have to train our teacher to deeply understand the value education. What's needed? How they can do? And then I'm sure that we can implement value education in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. If only there were more people like you in government and in public institutions, I think the dream of value education becoming a reality will become more certain. Thank you very much, sir, for your words of wisdom and commendation. Next person is a very resourceful problem solver for concerns that affect planet Earth. He effortlessly combines and uses several disciplines: natural science, ecology, biodiversity, disaster management, pollution control, climate change. You have one expert, all these rolled into him, and also sustainable development. He has turned out to be an icon of front-rank importance. He currently heads the National Science Section of the New Delhi's UNESCO office, Dr. Ramboj.
Om Sai. I think it's a privilege, and I'm feeling blessed today in this August gathering. Since last 2 days, we have heard diverse opinions about value education. Your Excellency made a very good presentation, how in Laos, value education is happening, and particularly since you have been associated with the UNESCO for a long time, I think I can understand that the essence of value education must be seen in your country, and that applies to all over the Southeast Asian countries. To begin with, in fact, I was much impressed by Sadhvi Bhagavati ji. We have been working for many years on the Ganga, sacred Ganga landscape, Ganga Action Parivar, which Paramath Niketan has. So I have had the privilege of working in that area. One thing which reminds me after listening to you is our spiritual and cultural values and how these are intertwined with the natural landscape, our social milieus, and in fact, even educational fabric. And this is the major challenge. During my doctoral days, I was working with the Northeastern Hill University in Shillong in Northeast India. We had close to 30 institutions in that region, schools, educational institutions, and we initiated a project, a dialogue between the formal knowledge systems, which we get from the schools, colleges, and universities, and the traditional knowledge system. We had come out with a book that was published by UNESCO and Oxford Publishing House, and that was really, really eye-opener. And I think when I joined UNESCO, there was a lot of experience from all over the world. I would say UNESCO is the prime mover in the field of value education. Whether we talk about environment education, which talks about the values for the nature, respect for nature, protection of environment, and all those skills, attitude, knowledge, awareness, all these terms resonate in environment education, in education for sustainability. And there was a whole decade of education for sustainable development, DESD. And after that decade, which ended in 2014, there was a 5-year period which was called as GAP, Global Action Program. And this was really to basically provide action into the education field, taking education, sustainability education into the field, beyond the walls of classroom. And that too, UNESCO, since it has so many sites, biosphere reserves, world natural heritage sites, cultural sites, landscapes, so it was easy. And there are several models, and everywhere in these sites, there is a amalgamation of cultural and biological diversity, so important for the survival of humanity. Recently, after this whole gap is going to end in December this year, United Nations General Assembly has passed a resolution, and this says, it's a UNGA resolution 72/222. It says, I quote, education for sustainability for 2030 is to be built for a more just and sustainable world through the achievement of sustainable development goals. Thus, Education 2030 agenda is to place greater emphasis on the contribution of learning content to the survival and prosperity of human beings. And this again talks about value. We are having several consultations to come out with this, the global model. And I think this is an opportunity, this event is very timely because many of this could be directly fed into the whole ESD 2030 agenda. I am convening a conference in Delhi in September 9-10, and I have requested that please come forward with this because it is being organized by UNESCO and many other organizers. So that will be a very good opportunity to help develop the global framework for ESD as well as value education, which is very much integrated and interlinked. Another thing, I'm not going to make many statements because this area is so vast. In fact, this World Bank, the World Development Report 2019 is very eye-opener. It talks about so many changes. The world is changing so fast, and it talks about education. Like the children who are studying today, they do not know what is going to come in the future, like the jobs. And in that scenario, I think value education must be aware of those facts which are coming into this new era of technology, which we call variously named as Industrial Revolution 4. And instead of all those transmissive pedagogies, we must go towards transformative pedagogies. And I think value education is one area which can bring into this transformative pedagogies into action in the education field. These should be encouraged to create values-based education for a peaceful and sustainable world. Then there is another very unprecedented, I think the connectivity which has facilitated. We are facing the interconnected global and local challenges both. And these range from many local issues as well as global one, ranging from climate change, biodiversity, and also the violent extremism, which is very I think, a challenge for education. And value education is one aspect which is also an intrinsic part of sustainability education, which can build new set of skills and competencies for solving many complexities of this current challenges. And these are related to inclusion, equity, including all forms of exclusion and marginalization, disparities and inequalities in access, participation, learning outcomes. It is also important to impart value education as an integral part of sustainability education, which we are talking currently, focusing on the most disadvantaged group, especially those with disabilities, to ensure that no one is left behind. I think United Nations Secretary General's agenda of education first, which talks about access, quality, and global citizenship education must be value-based, and value education can become the building block of such a global or universal education agenda and agenda for 2030. Thank you very much.
Thank you. In the proper perspective. The next speaker has a lot of passion in holistic education and believes in lifelong learning, and a strong believer in human development. It's led this pediatric nurse turned educator to Narung School, where she is academic director. This is a school that basically rises in the joy of learning, reverberating with vibrant students, zealous staff, and spirited management. Mrs. Suvana Shivapal.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. Yes, I will speak from my experience, as a teacher. We start Lung Arun School in 1997, which means 22 years ago. In Thailand, there wasn't any the school like Lung Arun before. So think back at that period of time. It's very the courage of our founder, Professor Papapat Niyom. She's in Thailand. She's very inspiring person who really worked hard to do the education development in Thailand for Thai students, for Thai children. She started the school because her son is autism. And she is the mother who tried very hard to find the channel to talk to her son or to deal with her son. And right now, her son is my teacher in the secondary school, teaching social study, yes, in grade 8. And he can go through university in the Southeast Asian faculty, and it's good to be a teacher. So with this thing that I told you, this history, because she's inspired me to be a teacher in the school. Since the school start, I haven't known her before, yes, but I'm gonna tell that I also believe in education before I start, you know. My experience is all in there. When I met her, it's like we are the co-worker who work very hard, try to develop Lung Arun School in the way that we believe that every human being can learn, no matter what, who they are, yes. So that is the starting point that we try to do the value integrated curriculum in Lung Arun School. Along that time, Thai education haven't paid more attention, any attention to this kind of education. And since up to now, Lung Arun School come when you can see in the video. My founder, she is the architecture. So the nature as the environment in Lung Arun School was designed, you know, to be the place for the children or anyone who come in to learn, to behave, yes. And the building in the school, not higher than the tree. So when you step in the atmosphere of the school, it's just you step in the forest or the nature and make everyone be humble, and we work in as the learning community. That means we all work together in doing this kind of education. Parents, staff, teachers need to be the role model for children to grow up in this way. So this is how physical environment, including people, influence on children. Yes, that is one thing that I try to say, that in every detail that we do in school, physical environment, daily routine is all designed with very careful, in detail, very delicate. Why? Because when the student, they be in that community or we call school, yes, their life, daily routine is also important. It's not just only come to school to learn academic subject or content and that's it. So daily routine in Lung Arun School is we plan, like for kindergarten, we build up mindfulness with them, but we just do it with them, not teaching them through mindfulness activities. That means everything that the children will do, they will do it more consciously, because that is the foundation when the one who can living right, eating right, listening right, and seeing things right. That is the start of education. And when they are master in their development, In primary school, we just start and expand more experience, not just daily routine, but with the academic subject content. How we plan that? We call this as the value-oriented integrated subject, which is, it's just, happen in Lung Arun School. We integrate social study, science, Thai language acquisition, and sometimes communication technology for the student to do the project. And they just learn from the environment around themselves, like in primary school, and expanded to the expander, like study about Bangkok. In middle school, we do this subject to learn about Bangkok because the school, is in Bangkok. Why I talk this in detail? I want to show that if we plan, concerning the student life and academic content integrated together, the student will learn and acknowledge the meaning, the value of the knowledge of academic subject. And they don't feel that they learn academic subject just in order to pass the exam. But they learn it because they need to have the knowledge needed to do the project. And the project need to be benefit to the community or the area that they have experience in. So it means that they learn with the real situation. That's how the knowledge is come from experiencing. So that is the philosophy in Lung Arun School, that we design the learning process with the active learning. Active learning is mean not just only doing activities, experience in the real situation, talk to the real people, solve the real problem, yes, but it also mean you use your thought in a better way to benefit others, yes. And you can see from the video, when they grow up to be the teenager or in the upper secondary school, their responsibility is getting more and more. Responsible to the society problems, to the community's problem, and to the world problem. That's why we use the world crisis issue to be the theme and to plan the unit plan in the value integrated subject in the school.
Thank you, Mr. I think whenever we hear such exciting schools, I only get a pang of envy. Why didn't these schools exist when we were growing up? Right? One second. Our next speaker is an integrative naturopathic physician who is also Israel's leading mind-body expert. As an international spokesperson who advocates the need for holistic and humanistic integrative paradigm in education. Dr. Sheinman is the co-founder and academic dean in Israel's Center for Yoga Therapy. Yeah.
Now it's working. So there are many Buddhist books in my library. I'll just mention two of the names and use the names. One is The Wisdom of No Escape, and the second is Start from Where You Are. And I'll use those sentences because we need to embody what we teach. And so, as you know, self-reflection was mentioned more than once. because self-awareness, there's no self-awareness and being and becoming without self-reflection. So I will reflect on this event, 2 days now, and I think if I reflect, I see we are not living, embodying balance, mind, body, spirit, movement, joy, playfulness, childishness, as much as we could. And if we want to teach value-based learning, we need to use this as a pedagogy. There's another sentence known in education, and I think it said, I heard and I forgot. I saw and I remembered. I did or I experienced and I understood. So for value-based teaching, information is not enough. So I want to put it in order for you to understand, take everything you have heard as good. I was motivated, I was inspired, I was happy to meet the faculty and to meet very few of you, too few of you, because we know learning is best when there is a collaboration and a sangha, when there is a connectedness and a sense of connectedness. And actually, from the perspective of youth, research is showing us that the best prevention for youth, wrong behaviors, wrong choices, sometimes risky choices, sometimes dangerous choices, are a sense of connectedness. And again, in value-based education, we need to figure out how do we do it, and we know it's not by speaking. Even Dharma talks may not be able to do that as much as we would have wished to. So when we do value-based education, we have to figure what different pedagogies we need to explore or design or inspire to try, and in order to create something, different pedagogies which we don't have the textbook for them yet, as much as I know. We have textbook for how to teach and how to lecture and how to dictate and how to examine and how to grade. But we don't have very good pedagogies, methodological pedagogies. I haven't seen many yet that tell us how can we enhance our own competency in such a way that we are quite good to enhance a child competency. And we got it as an adult, and we have to transform it to children or young adults. So that's a whole new skill that education is now searching or needing to search how to redesign it. This conference is in the context of redesigning education, re-envisioning education, redefining education. That's clear. It was all understood and accepted, and I take it as a given too, that knowledge-based learning is not enough, far from good enough. We need more piece of the pie, value enhancing, competency enhancing, attitude enhancing, skill enhancing in the box, which is the human being. And it's obviously not a box, it's a living process. Originally, until 20 years ago, I was for 20 years in the area of integrative medicine, holistic medicine. 20 years ago, I was pulled into education. So in the last 20 years, I use my holistic integrative medicine filter to look at education from a holistic and integrative perspectives. In the last 2 years, I've been either doing workshops or presentations or lectures in USA, Canada, Australia, Estonia, Portugal, Budapest, Bhutan, Hong Kong, Thailand, Czech Republic, Israel, and now in India. So I want to share with you mostly what I see from a bird's eye about what's happening in education. And I'm not sure it will help you, but I think you will be more able, I hope, you will be more able to see this event as part of something bigger. And it's always good to know that there's something bigger than us, something that we are part of, something bigger. So I'll just mention a few events because I said to the Vice Chancellor in the break, I think India India is very well known around the world as a place, as a country. Even Indian wisdom, yoga, meditation, and more than that. But education in India, from everything I went to, I never heard, oh, we should learn something from India, which is unfortunate. And I think the world is not enough known. Education in the world might not be enough known to you. I want to introduce you to what's happening in the world of education in today's world, around the globe. I'll just mention a few things and I will put a highlight to what you should Google. So the first thing you should Google is social emotional learning. It was hardly mentioned, it was mentioned, but very little. Social emotional learning is how to cultivate social intelligence and emotional emotional intelligence. It includes 5 fingers: self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, social intelligence, and good decision-making, good behaviors. It's obvious that information is not going to add to any of those fingers. We need experience-based, experiential-based learning. So this education, values are included, needs to create environments and opportunities for learning to take place. Some people here have discussed it, and some people on the stage in the last 2 days have touched it, and more than touched it. Google CASEL, the collaboration for academic, social, emotional learning, and there's a lot of information, useful one, that you can use in your schools or in your classes for assessment, for intervention, for creative thinking, etc. There's a book I'm a small part of that started by UNESCO Delhi, a different institute, Mahatma Gandhi for Peace, UNESCO Institute, social emotional learning. And when the book will be available, you will probably be able to get it. Two years ago, because I've seen of what's happening around the world, everywhere around the world, initiatives presenting education to change itself, trying to transform itself. We not only we want to transform the child or ourselves as human beings or as teachers or as parents or as citizens, education is trying to change, to transform itself. In different places, it has different names. It's good to know, because we need to integrate the knowledge. The knowledge is not integrated yet. We heard positive education, positive psychology in education. In Bhutan, it's GNH, happiness in education. In the States, it's more social emotional learning. In England, is mindfulness in education, becoming stronger and stronger. In other places, it's well-being in education, and we heard about holistic education, like in Thailand, Hong Kong. This is the word used most frequently. Everything is a small scale compared to public education, but things are moving, things are shifting, paradigms are slowly changing. We are part of that. I think it's good to know that we are part of a bigger paradigm shift, and it's us or you to figure how can we contribute to the paradigm shift. Because of that, 2 years ago, I created a global initiative. Some people here have been part of this initiative, the Soul of Education initiative. Not demanding, just inviting you to Google the Soul of Education initiative and Google me just to be sure you get the right site. Because a book was written long ago with the same name, The Soul of Education, by a very interesting American educator, Rachel Kessler. If you Nimrod and the Soul of Education, you'll see a little more information about what I've just said. And just 6 weeks ago in Prague, there have been 40 world experts, educators, not in a conference, but in a big table, round table, and small tables to explore, discuss, dialogue, explore what could we contribute to the next model of education. And we just realized, I realized, as the initiator, that actually we just began the beginning of that. It's a long process, and it shouldn't scare us because we know it's life learning. So it's not a shotgun approach. It's a long-term learning for education, for us, and for the process. Unless miracles will happen, like Berlin Wall fell in one day, suddenly, unexpectedly. Another thing to Google is what's happening in the OECD. OECD, for some reason, is less known in India. It's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Usually it was involved and interested in money, financial situation, and somewhat social situations. And a few years ago, it began to lead a big education initiative called Education 2030. It was published a year ago. A year ago, a child age 6, when he would be 18, it will be 2030. So they called that Initiative 2030. You should Google OECD Education 2030. And you'll see that what they say is exactly, I think, what we want. Because it's about education that can promote the learner to be a better human being, and to express his best potential and be able to contribute to the welfare of himself or herself and the society and the planet. It's not very far away from what this conference was about. And right now, I couldn't be in the meeting in Vancouver. I was invited because I chose to be here. But there's a meeting now in Vancouver with the same wavelength. It's OECD, so it's not the same language, but very similar framework, very similar waves and wavelength. From everything I've seen, there are agreements, and we can agree on the agreements. Everyone agreed that change is required all around the world. The question is, how can we and you and we contribute to the change? Not wait for the change, because there's no time to wait. And it's not only by listening, it's by doing and collaborating. Only by that change can happen. Everyone agrees there is a need for a whole child approach. So there's no argument about that. There are different translation what a whole child approach is, but there's no argument. And the question is, how do we do that? That's a big question. How do we live that as a teacher and make the classroom alive and full with that climate, that energy of a whole child, with a whole teacher, as a whole human being? So we instill whole human beingness in ourselves and in the children, one by one. And there's always be problems and challenges and the problem makers. How can we keep resiliency despite circumstances? Everyone agrees that we need as teachers to create a climate, an atmosphere, a class culture or a school culture for learning to take place. And again, it's us to design. There's no 1, 2, 3, 4 rules how to do that yet. Everyone agrees less lectures, more experience, more opportunities to experience, to engage, to collaborate, to create, to share, to imagine, to meditate, to move together. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I did a calculation.
Thank you.
Instead of 5 minutes, everyone here took 15. So we need to be congruent, and we weren't, and I'm sorry for that.
And we will have the last speaker of the day. I honestly do not know how to introduce him. He is erudite, spiritual, passionate, and devoted. When Robert Bolt was asked to describe Sir Thomas More, he simply called him man for all seasons. We also give up and call this man for all seasons, our mentor, Mr. Narasimhamurthy.
Thank you, Brother Anand Rahman, for those words of kindness. I want to offer my gratitude to the Lord Almighty, Bhagwan Sri Sathya Sai Baba, the presiding deity of this campus, for having brought me into the company of so many of my brothers and sisters who are such passionate, wise, and inspiring leaders in education. Some of them are on my either side, and some of them are right in front of me. When Brother Nimrod said India is well known, I remembered what the noted French writer and philosopher Romain Rolland said about India. I quote him, "If there is a place on the face of the earth which has been the home for the highest thoughts of all living men and women since the earliest times when man began the dream of existence, it is India," he said. Another great thinker in modern times, British historian Arnold Toynbee said, at this supremely dangerous moment in the history of the world, there is only one way of salvation. It is the Indian way, he said. I heard this evening Bhagwan Baba telling revered Sadhuji, the movement to save mankind, the movement to transform the world should start from India. No doubt we are all in India at this very auspicious moment, in a very auspicious place. After having heard such passionate talks about transformation in education, let me confess, I have nothing to add. T.S. Eliot asked a question to all men and women in the modern times: where is the life that we have lost in living? Let me tell you, I have found that life by living with you, my dear brothers and sisters. Where is the wisdom that we have lost in knowledge? My dear brothers and sisters, I have found that wisdom in the knowledge that you imparted just now, all of you. Where is the knowledge that we have lost in information? Let me tell you, I found that knowledge in the information about what you have achieved in your areas, especially in the field of education. Such passion, such wisdom generally don't go together. But we have such passionate leaders here. I'm not just referring to brothers and sisters and on either side. I also see in the audience many such inspired men and women. They are the salt of the earth. As I was hearing to the learned expositions, really, with the grace of God, truly a global model of values-based education has crystallized, not in my mind, deep down in my heart. It was Khalil Gibran who said, most sacred of our tears do not seek the eyes. I would like to add to that, most sacred of our thoughts and feelings do not seek the tongue. Silence is the best communicator of wisdom. I would like to trade my time now with the moderator so that I will get more time tomorrow morning. After this session, we are going to have a brainstorming session with all the wonderful brothers and sisters. And we'll come out with a model which I would like to present tomorrow morning. Thank you very much. Very, very grateful to you, every one of you, including teachers who have gathered here from all over India and many parts of the world. I feel really blessed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Narasimhamurthy. Aptly spoken. The convention is, when the whole thing is over, it's the job of a moderator to summarize all that in a few words. So much knowledge is wafted in, so many precious gems and pearls have been thrown out. I'm not going to take the diabolical liberty of summarizing all that in 3 lines. But all this will be our inputs. As Mr. Narasimhamurthy suggested, we have an all-night session. Our intention is, over this period itself, to try and propose a universal global model of education which could become a blueprint which we can all operate and people of all the countries can operate. So with all these outstanding contributions from these outstanding men and women on either side of me, I think we will close at this time. All I'm going to do is thank these ladies and gentlemen for all that you have said today, for all the contributions that you have made. Thank you very much for coming. Please come again.
Thank you so much for that beautiful panel discussion and presentation. I'm sure all of us have a lot to take home after listening to their learned speeches. We would like to offer our sense of gratitude, a token of our love and appreciation to all of you. May I please request Dr. P.D.N. Srinivasu, Vice Chancellor of the Sri Sathya Sai University for Human Excellence, to kindly come on stage and offer our tokens of gratitude. Sadhvi Bhagavati Saraswati. Ms. Jayashri Ashok. Mr. Jose Pacheo. Madam Kunmati Amal. His Excellence Mr. Litu Bopao. Dr. Ram Booch. Ms. Suvana Chivapruk. Dr. Nimrod Scheinman. Shri B. N. Narasimhamurthy. And to our moderator, Mr. Anand Rahman. We thank you all so much. That brings us to an end to this evening session. Tomorrow morning session will begin at 10 a.m. Everyone is requested to assemble in the auditorium by 9:45. The program will commence at 10 a.m. Thank you all for joining us. Have a lovely evening. Thank you.